Is that one of the worst sequels of all time? Maybe.
Wait,
Anybody?
what is that? What is that?
The Fly 2.
With Eric Stoltz. Is he in the lead of that?
I don't even remember who the lead is of it. It's such a mess of a movie.
Even before, I'm going to dive into it right away. Like Cronenberg was basically like, or Mel Brooks was, hey, do a sequel to The Fly. And Cronenberg's like, hey, what do you want me to do? He just the sequels are always just more of the same. And Cronenberg's like, I'm done. I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
That's why it's so terrible. Hey, folks, welcome to Film Trace. This is a podcast where we trace the life of a film from conception to production, all the way to release and reception. It is season 15. We are doing Visionary Remakes. This episode is focusing on the 1980s. So obviously The Fly from 1986, David Cronenberg. And then the original we'll talk about as well, The Fly from 1959. With special guest today, Daniel Malone from the You Talkin to Me podcast. Daniel, introduce yourself and tell us what you've been up to.
Great, yeah. Hey guys, nice to be back. So I'm Dan. I'm the host of the You Talkin to Me film podcast, which is sort of it charts the journey of my film obsessed son James. We take a classic movie each episode that he's never seen before, and we watch it together, and then we record a podcast about it. So we've been doing it for a few years now, but significantly, when we first started, James was 13, and he's now turned 18.
Nice.
So we've got this sort of really interesting, obviously he sounds very different in the early episodes, but he's sort of, a boy becoming a young man, kind of like, by watching these amazing movies. So it's been a really good ride.
That's awesome. And you guys recently did Taxi Driver. How did that go? How was that?
The titular film.
Yeah,
It was the one we were always held it back until I think we recorded it a week before his 18th birthday. Nice. And he loved it. It was great. It's the sharing of these movies. Sometimes he's never heard of them. He hadn't heard of Night of the Hunter, and he thought that was amazing. And sometimes he wants to, do a movie that he's really interested in. So that was why we did Mulholland Drive, because that was one that he was really, really keen to view. So yeah, it's really good. I think now we're sort of in our stride a bit because he's so much older than 13. Great, he's got some views, but by the time he's 18, he's a real film buff. He studies film at college. He's hoping to go and do film production at uni. So there's a real keen interest.
Good work, Dan.
Was there ever like a movie where you like loved and he just hated and you're kind of upset by it?
Yeah. He doesn't always like the movies that I go for. He's not that jazzed by the original Blade Runner.
Interesting.
Yeah, okay. He really likes the sequel. So to him, it's like, oh yeah, that's one of those ones where the sequel's better than the original. And I'm like, what? But
that's young people. It's like
it was the same. I taught the original Blade Runner last year, and I was so excited especially because I had like 4 or 5 kids that were all about Denis Villeneuve, and then it just like kind of fell flat. I was like, no.
I wonder why that is. Oh man. Anyways, I self-admittedly do not like the last like 45 minutes of Blade Runner, so kill me.
Director's cut or theatrical?
I think it's theatrical. Director's cut I kind of like. It's fun.
Yeah. It has to be director's cut, really.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, let's dive into it. The Fly. And it's also The Fly 1958, not 1959, like I said. That was my bad. What I like to do first is dive into baggage, our histories with the movies and films. I'll start out. I'd never seen the original Fly from 1958, so it was a brand new watch for me. The 1986 version from David Cronenberg, I've seen a couple of times. Actually, I like David Cronenberg a lot, and we've talked about him a lot in the podcast, I feel like. But I actually did not sit down and watch this one until I want to say a couple of years ago. I think it scared me a lot as a kid. Mm-hmm. And I just was like, it's like whatever, it's this dumb sci-fi movie. And then sitting down and seeing it for the first time maybe during COVID era, blown away by it. And so this was a really interesting rewatch for me, maybe third time I've seen it fully all the way through. So excited to talk about that one. The original Fly, we'll see what we talk about on that one. Daniel, what about you? Have you seen both these movies before?
Yeah, so do you know what? I actually think I saw the original Fly before I saw the remake.
Right.
So we had I don't know if you're aware that we had a season of cult films in the UK on the BBC called Movie Drome, and every week there was one or two kind of classic cult movies shown. And I think the second season, something like that, they showed the original Fly. So I was probably 14 or 15, something like that. But do you know what? I actually thought it was, thinking back before I did the rewatch, I was like, I'm sure that was black and white, but obviously it is. We'll perhaps talk about the color in that. But I didn't watch the Cronenberg Fly until probably my early 20s. So I certainly didn't see it when it was released because I was too young. So yeah, maybe, probably like early 20s, but I haven't seen it since. But the rewatch was excellent, and I watched it with James actually. So he also thought it was excellent.
Awesome, that's fantastic. Chris, what about you? You have a deep history, I feel like, with
yeah. I mean, it's yet another TBS origin story. But
Monster Vision.
No, not maybe Monster Vision was one of them.
He did show it on Monster Vision.
Yeah, no, it very well could have been. Which seems to be kind of like our movie drum. I'm looking at the wiki page for this British show. Alex Cox was the original host of it. That's amazing. Yeah, this totally looks like something now I got to do deep dive on from across the pond. But yeah, this looks like they also showed Dead Ringers on that, and we did an episode about that Cronenberg film. So this is actually our second foray into the iconic auteurs work, and this was like my entry point for him was the remake of The Fly, and it was definitely TBS, probably Monster Vision, with Joe Bob Briggs, and it was the edited for American cable television version, so we didn't get a lot of it. But then I do remember like Joe Bob, maybe it was Joe Bob, or it was like our friend Ryan, who was telling me like, no, you got to go get the tape from the store. And so yeah, I have it's one of those iconic blockbuster memories is going to like get The Fly. And I think I must have been 14 or 15, and I was unsure if they'd, sometimes depending on who the cashier was, they would let you take an R-rated movie, or sometimes they wouldn't. And bringing it home and like watching it surreptitiously on my like 12-inch TV VCR combo in my bedroom, and just like I was equally like horrified and titillated by both the gore as well as the sex. I have a very distinct memory of this being like the most sex I'd ever seen in a movie at the time.
Interesting. Okay. Oh.
That was certainly like what kind of deeply embedded in me until I saw it again, going on a Cronenberg kick. I think like right around the time Crimes of the Future came out, and rewatching it. So this was my third watch, I think, total, and just being like completely floored by how not just out there it is in terms of like R-rated content, but also in terms of just like it feels like in my opinion, perhaps like the most pure distillation of what Cronenberg is. And I hadn't seen the original until I had like a 50s B movie phase, watching the original Blob and stuff maybe 10 years ago. And I really don't remember watching this one. I know I did because I have, like, when I was doing the rewatch a few nights ago, I was like, oh yeah, and it's like the wife is more of the main character. Oh yeah, it's like doesn't make sense how it's one human arm and one fly arm. But it definitely didn't make an impression on me when I was going through that 50s B movie kick. But it was interesting watching it, knowing, especially after having done a couple more watches of Cronenberg's version, and I don't know. I mean, I think that I found it interesting enough in a 50s B movie way this time around, but obviously it was not very memorable to me the first time. And I know, Dan, we just texted briefly about it. You found it pretty boring, right?
Oh my God. Yeah. This was for me, and I hate to do this because I don't want to, I want the podcast to be more in depth and critical and to think about it from different angles, but you do have to have that immediate experience of it. And it just was, I don't know. There's certain things about it that are attractive. Like obviously the cinematography is, very 1950s horror. It looks interesting. Vincent Price, who I love, I have nothing against him. He definitely does well-ish in this movie. I think the thing for me is that, I don't know. It felt very inert, and there's not really. It sort of builds and builds and builds. It stays very close to the short story, which I thought was interesting. It didn't really seem like it was punched up that much for on screen. Or for sort of a movie script. Original short story was published in Playboy back in 1957, so only a year before. I've been noticing that a lot recently. I always thought that like they sell the rights to the book and make the movie within a year, or like even before the book's out. I thought that was a recent phenomenon, but apparently it wasn't.
Oh, no.
We keep seeing it pop up over and over again, where a book or a short story is released one year, and the next year they have a movie in theaters. But that was the case with this one. It definitely has the B movie DNA to it, but it's like a top shelf B movie just because of the way it looks and the production design. This is obviously not one of those throwaway, second run films that was very popular during the 1950s, because people hung out at the movie theaters is what they did. And so it has some things going for it. I think ultimately for me, one of the things that stood out in my experience of watching it was it was not engaging. It felt like it was plodding along. There's not really the fly sort of reveal. I looked at the time marker. I think it's like 58 minutes into it.
I did exactly the same. I did exactly the same thing.
Yeah, I was just like, oh, that's it. I don't know. Like I really wanted to like it. I went into it with like some excitement. And I don't have a lot of history with B movies and sci-fi stuff from the 50s, so I don't have like a great sort of a lens to look through it in terms of comparing it to others. I just think for me, it is so hard, I think, to watch this one and then compare it to the Cronenberg version, which is just so maximalist and it's just like so extra. It's just in your face. The story's great. It's very tight, and it's like a tight 90. This is also like 90 minutes. It's explosive. Whereas this one, I don't know. Do you guys think, and Daniel, maybe you can take this. Do you think that like this, because you saw it when you were younger, do you feel like this was, for the time period, like a shocking movie, or a movie that like maybe did a lot more for people than it's doing for me?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. I think it is a sort of a cut above perhaps some of the other, the cheapies, let's say, in terms of 50s kind of shock horror. Whether or not it was actually shocking or actually frightening, I think it's, for me, I mean, I suppose the bits I liked about it, I liked the kind of non-linear storytelling. I thought that was quite interesting, and probably sort of unique, I guess, compared to those other sort of 50s kind of, I suppose, science gone wrong kind of movies at the time. So I liked that. I did, I was, it tested me, perhaps the same as you, Dan, in terms of like get on with it. And I watched it after the rewatch of the Cronenberg. So I've just seen this, absolutely packed full 90-minute classic movie that ticks all the boxes that you want it to tick from a body horror movie. And then I've watched this, nice looking and quite interesting in parts, but ultimately, yes, probably like you said, Dan, a bit plodding. But I think that's, is that the limitations of what they can do with effects. I mean, they didn't have that really nice slow mutation that you get in the Cronenberg. They've got that's not the plot here. The plot is he's instantly turned into half man, half fly, albeit it's just his head and his claw, if that's what that is. But their version of the big reveal is that he has a blanket over his head, for half of the film. So yeah, I mean, I guess a little creaky looking back at it now, but at the time, it probably was seen as a fairly solid addition to that genre.
And I think to kind of put a point on that is the additional reveal at the final scene with the actor's head on the fly stuck in the cobweb.
Yeah, probably my favorite scene by far.
and it's I mean, I think that's one of the things that like firmly places it into that B-movie or cheapy territory, because one of the anecdotes that kept coming up in my research is that like the guy who played the detective and Vincent Price just could not keep a straight face for filming that ridiculous closer. So I think that between that and there's also it's kind of silly because it's a 50s sci-fi movie, but it seems like a lot of people looking back on it are pretty upset that the science was somehow that his brain would stay in the fly's body so that he could communicate, whatever. But I mean, I wonder
you got to give it some sort of leeway.
You can't Neil deGrasse Tyson this too much. You have I think the thing that stood out for me this time that, like I said, wasn't very memorable the first time, but perhaps just that was because it was in the glut. I think I remembered I had also seen Them for the first time, to be more specific to the insect horror of that time period. And the thing that stood out here is I mean, I've got a theory, but I don't know how airtight it is, but I think I read.
Give me this theory. This is a good one.
Yeah. So like the prevailing theory is that this is a allegory for atomic power, and it's a post-war, like a lot of those movies were in the late 40s and 50s. But what I took from it this time, especially by centering Owen's character, the wife, that it feels more like an like 50s version of like a exploitation film version of Far From Heaven, or one of the early what's the filmmaker that he ripped off a lot?
Douglas Sirk.
Yeah, thank you, Douglas Sirk. Melodramas where, I mean, is she finding out that her husband's gay and
swinging for the fences, Chris? That's what I love.
Keeping him in the closet in the basement. So then you might ask, okay, what about the fly buzzing around that she's trying to catch that has the male head on it, right?
Yeah.
Is this like her attempt at, it's like metaphor for the futile attempt at trying to convert or like keep the secret, because it's near impossible. And so then the only ultimate conclusion there is death, right? It's
and I can see, it's a little bit out there, but I kind of get where you're going with it. And then it's like
so. Sorry, Dan.
Go ahead, Daniel. Yeah.
No, I was gonna say, is it like if you take it to the extreme, do you mean like she's horrified by it, but she still loves him? That
right.
kind of.
Yeah.
And then the men step in and see this abomination and must kill it. Right. It's like extreme,
which they cannot believe for the longest time, right? They need.
Yeah, exactly. All right, that's something. I mean, with the atomic sort of angle, she does make that whole speech, right? I forget what she says exactly, but it's all like, "Oh, this is scary. It scares me." There's obviously during this time period, we're just at the start of the Cold War, we're post World War II. The nuclear age has begun. Them is probably a better touch point for that one because it's very ingrained in those ideas. But I think here it's like the ideas that they're playing with, I think, are interesting, and a lot of this is from the short story, but the idea of and I guess this has kind of been a reoccurring theme in literature and stuff like that, going back to like Frankenstein, of playing with science, and science is a danger and technology is a danger, and sort of understanding the limitations of human beings and what we can understand, which, ironically, and you guys might disagree with this, but I feel like that concept has just I've never seen a concept like that die so significantly in my lifetime, but that is one of them. That like science is dangerous or science can be bad. That is just gone, right? It doesn't exist.
What?
Oh, I think... this is going to get into a philosophical podcast right now.
I know, and we're going to once again bring up Ex Machina on a podcast that has nothing to do with Alex Garland.
I mean, the AI angle is probably the biggest version of that now, but I think like scientism, which is the concept that like science is always right and science is the ultimate truth, that won out. And like that has basically taken over most of our thinking in terms of like the last 30, 40 years. Like can we think of, outside of AI, which is a very recent thing, can we think of something that's tangential to this in terms of people being afraid of just the concept of science, the concept of logic or experimentation? It just seems like that's all evaporated since the atomic age.
I mean, Oppenheimer.
Well, yeah, but that's about the atomic age, though. I mean, I'm talking about like the idea or criticism of science is just being wrong because it's trying to question things, and there's limitations. Like I just don't. It doesn't seem like that's
outside
really
of the AI angle,
which is very recent.
And
also, that's not really science. That's tech. Like that's very specifically. That's very specifically to like tech companies. I'm talking about like science and experimentation and stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. Like
Nothing?
maybe
That's
like
what I thought. So I
DNA stuff and
yes, but that was like big in the
Jurassic Park.
90s. That was big in the 90s. Like when they started to do like Dolly the sheep was cloned, and that was a big thing. But like recently, there just isn't like this. There isn't like a criticism of science of what it's doing or what it's trying to do. It feels like that criticism was like bigger in this time period, and it basically has faded. That's my theory. I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's probably something in that. I mean, we don't really get science gone wrong kind of movies anymore, do we? We don't really get the playing God kind of movies anymore. You're probably right.
It'll be interesting to see what Guillermo del Toro does with Frankenstein. I think that once again that'll be a period piece, right?
Yes.
But I don't know. I think that I get your distinction between technology and science, but I still think that there's like this. It's the question of curiosity, ultimately, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
and the curiosity. Yeah, I mean, there's a cat in this movie for a reason. Curiosity kills.
Where did the cat go, by the way?
Into the walls. Yeah,
into like the ether. That's why I was always confused. It's like,
okay. I know nothing about science. I'm an English teacher. He keeps saying atoms when referring to living creatures. And so what's the distinction between like the ashtray? Because I feel like that's one of the more interesting kind of updates in the 80s version, is that it becomes like gene fusion rather than this concept of like atoms getting, disassembled and then reassembled. But like... there's a distinction there, right? Between
that's just the science of the time, though, isn't it? That's just that.
Is that the science at the time? Okay.
Yeah. I think they're just. Go ahead, Daniel. Yeah.
No, that was it. Just that's their understanding. That was probably, high tech at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just like back then, it's like just atoms in the void. That was like one of the scientific viewpoints, is that there is nothing special about living flesh. It's just atoms. Right. And that's like one of the scientific theories, it led to a lot of not so great things, but like, that's one of one of the massive distinctions between the two films. Like Cronenberg is so obsessed with the body and flesh, the poetry of the flesh and all that kind of stuff. Like such an interesting dichotomy between the two.
What do you, okay, here's the other thing that stood out to me a lot, especially because I watched it on my, home movie theater projector, the cinemascope aspect, like you said, it makes it handsome. It's very well shot. It almost to the point where it feels like, that's maybe where I got like the gay theory from, because it feels very much like 50s housewife. Like this is, she's taking care of the household, kind of deal. And so essentially that renders it like kind of like a filmed play. Like there's just two sets, right? There's well, maybe three: the living room, the bedroom, and the basement. Why would they go for this kind of look when it's essentially a chamber drama with, you know, a fly costume in the middle?
Do you mean in terms of like
just like the look of it? It's like very wide, even though it's almost every shot is indoors except for the very ending. Why?
Yeah, I think the thing that popped up to me and kind of looking at the research and trying to think about this in terms of like its means of production and how it was produced. You know, I think the original producer was the guy who ran, what was it, Regal Pictures, I think.
Oh, right, yeah.
What was his name? Robert Lippert, yeah, of Regal Pictures. He was supposed to huge B movie guy. He put out 25 films in 1956. I mean, we're talking just like boom, 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 boom. And it's so 20th Century Fox, you know, has had a partnership with him, did a lot of co-bills with him and his films. And he was basically saying that, oh, we would shoot movies in basically like a week for about $100,000 to $200,000. Now, this one was shot for about $400,000. So double your bottom of the barrel B movie. And you can see it. Like it feels like to me, and I kind of picked this up a little bit from the sources that I was reading through, that like 20th Century Fox really liked what Lippert was doing with the B movie stuff, but wanted to sort of enhance it a bit. And what's funny too, you bring up CinemaScope. It was shot in CinemaScope. I think this is right. I might be wrong with this, but they wouldn't advertise it as CinemaScope. Because 20th Century didn't want that tag to be on their B movies, even though they shot it in CinemaScope. So it was like a weird, this one is like, I think The Fly is a strange movie where it has this one foot in that real grindhouse B movie world. And then another foot in sort of 20th Century Fox's more mainstream top shelf type exhibition type films. And so I think it's like an attempt to bridge those two worlds. We see that sometimes with like these days with like Blumhouse and Universal and how they have a partnership, and Blumhouse is pumping out these low grade horror movies, making some cash. And then every so often they sort of put out a bigger one that has a little bit more behind it. Maybe like, I don't know, take an example. Like maybe like Get Out is a good example of like a partnership that worked out really well. But yeah, so, go ahead, Daniel. Yeah, what do you think?
I was going to say, so does that make this, you know, quite rare then? You know, looking at those other films around about, you know, late 50s films, has this become, you know, almost like, you know, that A-list type kind of sci-fi horror, like you would, like the examples you just gave? I've not seen the original The Blob. And those sorts of well, although I have seen Invasion of the Body Snatchers from 56.
Oh yeah,
so, yeah. You know, is this that rare case then? But you know, obviously, it's not necessarily ended up being a classic, where it is just that rare thing, like a one-off almost.
It does have that feeling to it, yeah.
Right. It has like a because that's one of my kind of closing questions. Is, you know, how much camp value is there here? It does seem like, and we did an episode about the original Body Snatchers, where it's like that was very much a B movie that happened to like have enough like context and subtext behind it to make it still stand on its own. Whereas The Blob with Steve McQueen is very like, I love that movie, but it's so silly. It's just like 100% camp. So I think The Fly kind of sits in this awkward place between the two, especially because unlike Body Snatchers, which, you know, got remade, and it's kind of got a different cachet to it, even though it has the same remake status. But like The Fly has like the ultimate remake. This might be like, of all the episodes we're doing this season, like this is the most prestigious, like the biggest jump in quality also from the original to remake.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
So can we use that as like a segue perhaps? I'm curious because, especially since you guys mentioned the timestamp of the transformation in the original, I was texting Dan, and I also noticed in Cronenberg's version, it's around the same time. And yes, there is like so much more that happens in that last half hour compared to the original, but it does take its time, even though, you know, you see the telepods within the first 10 minutes. You really don't have any like evidence of the mutation other than the hairs on his back until the hour mark. What is
really?
I didn't realize that. That's like a really good call out, because it doesn't feel that way at all when you watch it.
Right. So what is it about like this first hour, like the time we spend with the characters, that feels so markedly different? We also don't have anything non-linear going on. There's no third wheel Vincent Price character, though you could make that argument for her boss, I guess, /X. What do you think's what do you think Cronenberg, before we get into the body horror stuff, which is the bread and butter, of course, but like, what is it about the first hour of this movie that makes it so much better?
Daniel, you take that one. Go for it. What do you think it is?
Well, I mean, so what you've really got in that first, say, 2/3 or first half is their relationship, isn't it? So, you know, ultimately, you know, it's a tragic love story. That's where this goes. But we are, before it becomes this kind of, you know, gore fest, if you like, what we've got is this relatively touching kind of relationship. We see, in fact, the whole film is their entire relationship, isn't it? Because it starts with the kind of meet cute in the very first scene, and then all the way to the, you know, obviously the ending, the climax, and we've seen their entire relationship. So maybe it's that. But I mean, also there's the we know something is going to happen. Things are odd, aren't they? So we're put in a position of seeing things in a slightly odd way up until those first reveals come in. So yeah, I guess that for me, probably watching their relationship grow. I don't know. Yeah. What do you guys think?
I mean, to me, it's the chemistry between Jeff and Gina Davis. Like it, I mean, they were dating at the time too, which is kind of all part of like the production background. It's like they didn't, you know, he didn't want to choose her, but she was the right person for it. They're magnetic. Like they have unbelievable chemistry on screen from the first frame of the film, and it feels like, in a way that the original does not do, it almost feels like a thriller in terms of this ratcheting up of the potential cataclysm that is happening.
Yeah.
And there's all these sort of hints that Cronenberg puts in the script, and Cronenberg had to rewrite the script basically 100%. Now, he says that a lot of the characterizations were in the original script, but he basically had to rewrite the whole thing. Mel Brooks gave him like $150K to do that. But I think that's the kind of key with him sort of taking the helm on this, because this movie started production before Cronenberg was even involved, but the original director had to drop out due to a tragedy in his family. It feels like, and this is something I was thinking about too today, just about Cronenberg in general. This is definitely one of his better films, if not his best film. And I find it interesting because this script is so tight and so well woven that it has this sort of inertia and power and narrative engagement, you know, up until there's the big gross out reveal and all the sort of crazy effects that are coming in, which is not always the case with him. You know, in his recent movie Crimes of the Future, although I enjoyed it, was a mess narratively. It was all over the place.
What? Okay.
It was a complete mess.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't build tension, does it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like this felt like a roller coaster. You know, like every single scene, the early scenes with The the early experimentations that go wrong, they go right. The scene with the steak is just like, it's amazing. It's just like you are so, I was so locked in, even on the rewatch. This is one of those movies where like I could sit down and watch the original Fly 1958 and be locked in myself and just be totally in, not looking at my phone, and I'd be like, feels like paint drying. This movie, especially even in the first hour, like you're talking about, it could be on a side screen and I'm playing a game and I'd still be constantly looking over at the screen. Right? It's just one of those films, I think because of the script, I think because of the production design, and I think just because of Cronenberg's sort of decisions on editing, where it is just, it's tightly woven and it just clicks from the first scene. I don't know, Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's probably tied with me with Dead Ringers still as my favorite Cronenberg's. The thing that stood out to me about this first hour, you guys are totally right on, both in the characterization and the chemistry of the two leads. I have to say there's something to be said for putting a baboon in a movie that wants to jump and hug you while you're shirtless. No, but for real, like, I think that you have, I think this comes back to kind of my comment about the sex in the film and how much that was like burned into my memory as a young kid watching this. And when you have two actors with chemistry and you're kind of implementing very vividly the correlations between sex and violence, which he does in a lot of his movies, including like History of Violence and Crash, both excellent films. You have this kind of synergy that, especially for the time period, just feels so magnetic. I think also one of the things that hit me for this rewatch was like the aesthetic of this movie is like so perfectly matched with the 2020s and like everything from the vaporwave to synth. Like it's just it feels like this is the perfect time to rewatch The Fly, and I think you could watch it not just as an AIDS allegory, which was kind of the prevailing theme, even though that was definitely not Cronenberg's intention at all. But it's interesting to think about it in terms of this age we're at with technocrats and AI and the possible disturbing link between curiosity and madness. It very much is like more in line with the Frankenstein tradition than I think it is with its own original film. I do have to share the anecdote too that just like blew my mind is that it wasn't just Jeff and Gina having sex while this movie was getting made, right? Like this, one of the fascinating anecdotes is that it seemed like everybody was hooking up on the set of this gross ass movie in this like gross ass dungeon laboratory. And one of the things that just like feels so of the time and once again like perfectly rendered, especially considering its use in Stranger Things so many years later and bringing it to the top of the charts again, Kate Bush's Running Up That Hill was just like the constant soundtrack whenever the cameras weren't rolling. That is it, like the smoky sensuality of Kate Bush plus like you're watching two people that love each other have sex on camera. Yeah, I'm sure it's just like going to get everybody riled up, and so that becomes like this idea. And I think there is a distinct link there that is different than the usual sex and violence link, which is that like Jeff Goldblum's character Seth Brundle is not just horny for his girlfriend. Like he is horny for science. Like he is horny for the advancement of like the human race. He's horny for not having to drive in a car again because he can now teleport wherever he wants. and I think that all makes a lot more sense to me watching it at, in my 40s than it did ever in my teens or 20s. Any other like kind of revelations like that for you guys, for being like, oh wow, like this hits different today compared to, like, it's always been a great movie, but it's a great movie now in a different way, which makes it even greater.
Yeah.
For me, I had forgotten there's a couple of moments with the Gina Davis character and with the John Getz character, her boss or ex-lover. There's a fear of contagion, isn't there? They're like, like almost can we go near Seth, So that watching it now, going through sort of what the whole world has been through recently, that totally sort of stood out for me. And just that high idea of kind of disease, really. I know there's a lot about general feeling of sort of broader metaphors for illness. I think that was really what Cronenberg was going for here, and even aging, but like terminal illness.
Oh yeah, totally.
Well, it's interesting too, because he, in response to the age question, I can't remember where it is, but I found an earlier source that suggests, especially as Seth gets to the end of his sort of transformation, Cronenberg used his own father dying of a bone disease as inspiration for a lot of that look. So I think it's like, and he doesn't, disavow the AIDS thing. He's it's a general sort of wasting away. It's dying, it's mortality. It's the fact that, like, we have to accept that we are alive, and being alive means that we're going to fall apart and die eventually, which is like one of those things that, like, nobody wants to accept and nobody wants to think about. And like, Cronenberg is so good at shoving that in our faces. And The Fly is the perfect example of doing that, of saying, and that's one of the things, as Chris, as you were talking, I was like, oh, that's interesting, because with the science angle and the sort of the Faustian sort of thing of, I need all this knowledge, I need to move things forward. I actually, when I saw it earlier, like 4 or 5 years ago, I definitely noticed that more. This last rewatch, I noticed the relationship more between him and Gina Davis, and like the tragedy of it. And it's just so sad.
Yeah.
Like, they're falling in love. They're obviously have this amazing chemistry together, but he's so ambitious and he's so driven. But the science part of it, ironically, and the Faustian part feels like it's played down a lot to me on this rewatch, where it's really about, him being in love with her, them trying to be together, but he chooses something else instead of that. And what really plays up the romantic tragedy of it for me is like the last half hour. I mean, we have like the abortion scene. There's multiple abortion scenes. There's the dream that she has, which is just disgusting, and
with Cronenberg's cameo as the doctor.
Cronenberg, which I think she requested because she was kind of nervous about the whole thing, and like she's like, Cronenberg, I want you to do this.
He did not want
to. And it's like, there's that moment where he breaks into the doctor's office and like looks at her and I think grabs her. There's this sadness about the whole thing.
Yeah.
And to me, it really does play more into this accepting of mortality and this accepting that our bodies will 100% break down no matter what we do. And I think there's this fatalism to the whole thing. Now it's all sped up, obviously, because of his condition, but it's sort of a love tragedy played out, at like 10x almost. I don't know if you guys feel similar to that or picked up on any of that.
Yeah, I did. I think that, I feel the same way about that kind of the tragedy of the relationship. And, he's in this position where he's losing control of his body. She's kind of, she's sort of fascinated by it. I guess she's repulsed by it as well. And it's that thing of, being in love with this thing that's sort of ultimately sort of repelling you. But I felt, especially when there's that bit where it's almost like classic sort of monster movie kind of trope where he's on the top of the building and he's looking down at Veronica and a John Getz character when he's leaving, and it's like he's alienated, and that part of his transformation, he's completely alone. He's not being able to. He's almost becoming he's losing his mental power as well. His whole character is being sort of changed. Ultimately, is inwardly and outwardly he's changing. So yeah, I felt that sort of more strongly, rather than it just being, oh, it's a body horror movie. All these other kind of more, maybe it's just because I'm older, or maybe we're all older now rewatching it. That those are the bits that we're picking out. He's not in that moment. He's not really human anymore. He's the transgression is so far gone. There's sort of no going back, and that I felt that kind of that alienation that ultimately is going to lead to that tragedy for their relationship rather than any other reason.
Yeah, and Dan, you mentioned watching this during COVID, maybe even like during like the quarantine portion of it, where that's just got to be a huge aspect of this film that perhaps was not as widely received, right? Like if you had a loved one dying of AIDS, or you yourself were a part of the gay community at that time, that would definitely hit. I think for me, I mean, that's one of the beautiful things about this movie, right? Is that like you can latch onto any of these pieces, and I think they're all equally valid. And the thing about the science aspect that still rings true and so vividly for me is still once again in that context of their relationship. Like she's a journalist, and she's very excited about the prospect of like having something for a possible cover story, especially in the midst of like trying to like make her boss her ex and still like be on her own as like a valid journalist. But then there being this very clear demarcation of like, okay, things have gone too far. Like I care about this guy and I'm going to keep trying to check in on him, but I'm done with like trying to like monetize this. Like this is clearly a danger. And I think I put that in my notes, and I kind of alluded to it earlier, that makes it like, if there's one thing I wish I got more of, is centering her character more, because it ends up very still like just like it would for an 80s movie by a male director with a male star, you do kind of flip suddenly more to Seth's side, and you need that for the alienation aspect, for so much of it. And I think you can still latch on to, especially because Gina Davis is just equally as magnetic here as Goldblum is, even though Goldblum gets to do all the ticks and actual transformation. But seeing her like stay strong and be like, I'm not like, this is officially like gone too far. Like both these men in my life, the one that's actually doing the science and the one that's trying to get rich off it, is out of the realm, and she's our stable base at the middle. But she's still completely empathetic to the point of like literally turns into this grotesque monster. His skin falls off, and she still senses that a part of Seth is in there, right?
Right at the end, really, right to the dying moments of the film. Even when the final, the final horror of that final, when he sort of like half Brundlefly, half pod by the end of it, and it's so it really gets you, so tragic. And even then, it's still him to her, isn't it? Even though visually and sort of in his mind, I guess, has probably completely gone. But yeah, she's still madly in love with this thing in front of her.
And
right.
go ahead,
I think we'd be remiss to not bring up The Substance, rewatching The Fly in 2025. And I know Dan and I have different opinions on it, but that was kind of the piece. I love how Cronenberg can make his movies like darkly comedic, but still have that like humanity in them. And it kind of helped me realize like, that's part of what I felt like I wished was in The Substance, is that character that still feels like grounded enough to like make it feel human. It felt so alien to me.
That's the term though. Like it's the grounded term. Like Gina Davis grounds this entire movie in like empathy. Right? Like she really does make this. I think if it was just Jeff and him, who's, by the way, amazing and like really does play Seth so incredibly well, and his eccentricity is played perfectly with him. He seems like an eccentric scientist who would do something like this. But it is Gina Davis who grounds the film emotionally. But it's funny that you say that, because I think that's what makes this movie more of like an emotional tragedy to me. Obviously, it is within body horror and part of that genre, but what I think makes it hold on as long as it has over the last 40 years now is that emotional grounding. But it's funny that even the Substance though, and Daniel, have you seen The Substance?
Yes.
Or it's just Substance, right? Not The Substance.
I saw it. I think it overstayed its welcome somewhat by about half an hour.
2.5 hours. Tight 90 like The Fly.
But here's the thing about that, and I think that you bring up a really good point. Whereas Substance is a polemic, The Fly is not a polemic. The Fly is, to me, an emotional tragedy played out with these threads of science and being overly ambitious, and how are you choosing your priorities in life and your values. It's all interwoven in that. Substance, you don't really see a lot of that. It's more of it's just more shocking, and it's more over the top, and it's almost like a parody polemic type thing, where The Fly is not that at all. I think it's kind of different.
You certainly don't get The Substance without The Fly. I mean, I think that goes without saying. But I sort of, like, for me, if we were going to compare the two, yes, The Fly is, grotesque as The Substance is. Yes, it's heightened and it's in your face, but at least it's sincere. And that was my takeaway from, obviously when I was watching The Substance, I couldn't help thinking about The Fly. And when I was watching The Fly, I couldn't help thinking about The Substance. But, but probably for the wrong reasons. But that's, I think the Substance might be over the top I felt maybe for the sake of being over the top, but everything you're seeing in The Fly is meant, with that kind of deep sincerity. It's taking itself seriously, even though there's funny bits in it, and perhaps it's maybe viewed a bit camp these days, or however you want to look at that. But ultimately, that's it takes itself seriously.
One of the things that I, in kind of looking back at The Fly, and because I don't remember it when it came out, I was like 4 years old when it came out. One of the things I've been interested in with a movie like this, because on my initial watch, I was blown away by how graphic it was, and how extreme it was. I mean, obviously, we didn't really talk about this, but like the makeup and prosthetics is groundbreaking. It won the Academy Award for Best Makeup. It's an amazing achievement in filmmaking, what they did here with the effects. But one of the things I was interested in, and I had to go back and look, was the reception amongst the general population to a movie like this. So it comes out in August 1986. Cronenberg at this time is not like, not like a massive filmmaker or anything like that. It's slotted in August, which is like, this is basically, it looks like a week or two before school begins. This is usually where they call a gutter slot. This is where you toss movies out. So they toss it out in the middle of August, and it does $7 million. This is $86. $7 million its opening weekend, which is quite good. And the thing that kind of blows me away is how low the drops are each weekend. We're going back to like the old podcast we used to do, the box office podcast.
Okay.
But there was something about this movie that really captured people at the time. In a time when moviegoing was, this time of year, not super popular. People are busy. It's right before Labor Day. People are showing up. and they're showing up weekend after weekend after weekend. It basically drops no theaters for over a month. What do you think it was that captured people back then? And it's one of the reasons why it has this big legacy, is that it actually was so popular back then. Of this like 85, 86, 87, it's the third most popular horror film of that time period, of those 3 years completely.
Wow.
So it's like, what do you guys think was it about back in the 80s? And now we kind of have to guess a little bit, that was so transfixing to people. And it just kind of also would contextualize, marketing was different back then. This is a lot of it's word of mouth at this time period.
Oh,
so you talk to your friend, you talk to your family on the phone, on the landline. Hey, this is cool. Well, you're seeing a person. You got to see The Fly. You got to see. What do you think? Is it the effects? Is it the grossness? Is there something so abnormal and is there a sense of objection here? It's so disgusting. What do you guys think it was?
I mean, to me, I mean, I can tell you about the UK perspective of this, because
Sure.
I mean, was I 12 when this film came out? But it was that word of mouth. It was, this wasn't, this had no sort of baggage. This wasn't marketed as a remake. Nobody knew about the original Fly when Cronenberg's Fly came out. So I think the marketing was pretty shrewd. It has a really great poster. But from vague memory, it was let's go and see this gross out movie that was getting a release that perhaps those types of movies didn't get, because this is a Hollywood movie, and it is being shown and potentially in more screens than perhaps a body horror shocker movie might, certainly more than any Cronenberg film prior to this, sort of Videodrome or the like. So it's getting that wider release. It's got that, I don't know, just that feeling of a decent budgeted movie that people are going to go and see, and perhaps the people that are seeing this haven't seen anything like it before, and that's the hook, that's the bit, and that's why they're talking to their friends and saying you've got to see this. And it's the same for when that's released on VHS. It's that one that you like Chris, you get your illicit copy and you watch it when you're 14. 14 is probably the best possible age to watch Cronenberg's The Fly.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, that would be what I would think. It's just that people hadn't seen this as a theatrical release, this type of movie with that kind of classic sheen of a Hollywood film.
Yeah, no, I was definitely gonna tap into that. Not just like the gross out aspect of it, but specifically this idea of it being illicit, it being kind of untouchable. I don't think, like, Cronenberg maybe made a little headway with Videodrome a few years prior, but like that was just such a, like, you couldn't even explain the concept of that movie without sitting down and watching it with somebody. But for here, it's also just got like that hook. It's just like a guy and a fly start mutating. Like, you might want to explain teleportation, but like you don't even need to. It's just like mad scientist, and his body starts falling apart. I did want to mention, it was kind of funny. My wife hadn't seen it, and she walked in while I was midway through it during one of the teleportation sequences, and she's like, "Is this like a early MCU, like a hero idea that didn't work out, The Fly?" So there a little bit of that quality of just like, it's just like that, almost like a gimmick concept, which is maybe the only the biggest hand-me-down from the original, is like, that's a great concept, right? Like, a fly sneaks in. It was on Siskel's top 10 of the year, I think, specifically because of that reason, where he was like, he hated sci-fi movies, but he was just like, you could actually believe that a fly, like, nobody notices a fly getting in to the pod. It's so perfect. I don't know. Like, we talk about so few perfect movies.
It's pretty close. I mean, it's maybe a little bit to Daniel's point too, is that, like, people haven't seen this before. It's a really good example of a fantastic, ambitious, unique artist getting the platform, right? Getting the big bucks, getting the big studio backing. They didn't want to back this. 20th Century is like, we don't want to do this because we don't want the protagonist to become the antagonist. They thought that was unsellable.
Yeah.
And then there's a leadership change at 20th Century Fox, like, oh no, actually want to do this. And then it has Mel Brooks backing. And so they're like, okay, we'll try it out. And it's a home run, but it is like that sort of left of the dial voice getting the broadband mass sort of messaging machine behind it. And it clicks. I mean, like, I have to like mention this really quickly, because think of like the 80s films you think are big. This was bigger than The Lost Boys. This was bigger than Fright Night. This is bigger than like Friday the 13th, Part 5, Part 2, Nightmare on Elm Street. It just was a massive movie. The only two movies that were big were Poltergeist 2 and Nightmare on Elm Street 3 in that 3-year period. So it was just like it's a grand slam with everybody involved.
Too bad that franchise didn't work out. God.
I haven't seen The Fly 2, so I can't comment on that.
Yeah,
man, you should.
Never seen it.
Yeah. Oh, it's a grade A mess in so many ways.
Well, that's what happens when Mel Brooks is like, just give me more of the same.
Yeah.
And Cronenberg is like, I'm going back to Toronto. I don't know what you're talking about.
You were right. It was Eric Stoltz. And then I was interested who the female lead was. It's Daphne Zuniga, who's from Spaceballs in like her first dramatic role.
Wonderful.
Isn't it directed by the guy that did the visual effects? Isn't it?
Yes.
So like and that is one of the only reasons to watch it is the effects are more of the same, a little bit more of advancement. It's still a fun watch, but it's a mess narratively. The trivia is ready and waiting for you two. Are you ready?
I am ready.
What a great list of films.
So here's
make it a little bit easier than before.
For our listeners at home, there's a graphic of 12 films from the 1980s that were remakes. And I'm going to read excerpts of reviews that came out at the time in response to these remade films. And Dan and Dan are going to attempt to see who can guess the most correctly and the most quickly. So get 1 point if you guess it correctly based on the excerpt from the critics' review, and best out of 5 wins. First person to guess it correct gets the point. Are you guys ready?
Yep.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. All right. Number 1. This is from Vincent Canby in the New York Times. Oh, my bad. No, this is from Time Out London. The seductively exotic surface of this mythically underpinned fantasy might be offset for some by much graphic gore, but if you can buy the romantic metaphors for the primitivisms of sexual obsession, the film delivers.
Cat People?
Yeah, nice work, Dan. I wanted to kick that off because that was another 80s movie that was just like doubling down on combining sex and gore.
I haven't
Paul
seen
Schrader. Paul Schrader, first Reformed fame, Taxi Driver fame.
You can't ever escape him.
No,
he's
on
everywhere.
One soundtrack, Giorgio Moroder. Okay, number 2. A lamentable production. Hardly a moment rings true that you almost feel like saying "pardon me" when you wonder why apparently didn't occur to the filmmakers that no chemistry was taking place.
Oh, there could be No Way Out.
Good guess, but no.
I'm saying Money Pit.
No, good guess, but no.
Breathless?
No.
Chemistry.
Oh, it's Dirty Rotten Scoundrels.
Yeah. Canadian Dan, you got it. It's always.
Yeah, I remember that being terrible.
Spielberg's worst movie, maybe.
Have you guys seen that? You guys both seen that?
Yeah. Oh, God. Yeah. My mom loved that movie. I watched it.
I think my mom liked it, too. I think I saw it in the theater with her.
Yeah.
And even as a kid, I was like, ugh.
God. Richard Dreyfuss cannot be a romantic lead. Okay. Number 3. It's 1-1. From the Washington Post. A gaudy erotic showcase for a male stripper. A couple of feeble-minded heads were put together on this would-be torrid production, a kind of glorified featurette for Playgirl subscribers.
What?
Is that Breathless?
Yeah. Get Canadian Dan beat you by just a hair. English Dan. I have not seen the remake of Breathless, and but that excerpt kind of makes me want to see.
It kind of sounds great.
How much Richard Gere is hanging out there. Was that, Daniel?
It is a good movie. It's worth
really? The remake?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
All right, let's check it out.
I'll give it a shot. Number 4. Also, the Washington Post. This is an attempt to make a 30s comedy through the lens of Steven Spielberg. There are contraptions and, quote, smart dialogue, and unfortunately, nothing to hold them together.
Is that Dirty Rotten Scoundrels?
No, good guess, though.
Is it We're No Angels?
Nope.
Oh, that was going to be my guess. We're No Angels.
Is The Money Pit?
That's The Money Pit. You got it. Yeah.
Wait, Spielberg was involved with that?
No, they were saying it was like... I mean, he did produce it, but yes. Okay. Yeah.
That movie's bad.
Yeah, we rewatched that together
on a dumb movie night. Yeah. Oh my God, it was terrible.
No. Last but not least, is it 2-2 now, or no? Is that 3-2, 3-1? Yeah, the guest is winning. Last but not least, from the Globe and Mail, a B movie with singularly silly psychological pretensions. Its neo-primitivism, there's that word again, is to the more complex moral cosmos of the Godfather saga as Disney is to Dickens.
Scarface.
Yeah, there you go.
That'd be Scarface.
Oh my gosh. No, people hated movies in the 80s. It was very hard. I was trying to find a decent positive excerpt for one of these, but no.
Wow.
I didn't know there's DOA remake with Dennis Quaid.
Oh my gosh.
Have you guys
when
seen
they were
that?
married.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah,
I have not seen that. Is that a remake of the old noir film?
Yeah.
No freaking way. I gotta watch this. I love the original DOA.
Same. So now you've got a couple movies to watch, and I've got to watch the Breathless remake. Dan, how can people find you on the interwebs as well as your podcast? Yeah,
well, I mean, you can obviously listen to the podcast. That'd be great. I'm on Blue Sky, so it's Daniel Mal 1. And that's the same on X as well. Still knocking around on there. Or you can follow the podcast, which is at Talking Film, and that's talking with no G at the end. And we're on TikTok as well. That's quite interesting. So that's talking_film.
How's TikTok going? You guys liking it?
Yeah, it kind of works.
I love that.
Pregnant pause. Thanks so much. This was so fun, Dan. Can't wait to see. Check out this Taxi Driver episode with you and James.
You guys got anything else coming up soon, or?
We've got a James Bond episode coming out. This week. But then beyond that. Just like the next one for me and James, I think we're going to do Midnight Cowboy. I think
that'll be fun as an 18.
So much better now he's 18. We can watch whatever we like.
Yeah, that's amazing. Awesome. Well, we always appreciate you being on the podcast.
Thanks, guys. It's been brilliant.
Of course. And then we've got what we got coming up, Chris. We got King Kong next week with a good friend Riley, and then we've got a Fistful of Dollars coming up for the 60s, and then we're going to close out this season with the Maltese Falcon 41 and 31. As always, thanks for listening. This has been Film Trace.